Hello and welcome everybody to this in-depth Lightroom and Photoshop editing tutorial where I will take you along with me editing this raw file of this tree and turning it into a photo like this while explaining every single step from the very start to the finished and fully edited picture. I'm gonna start off in Lightroom with the different tonalities, the different colors, the different exposures, shadows, highlights, and dynamic of the overall picture. And afterwards I'm gonna bring the picture into Photoshop to merge it together to really get the best amount of sharpness from front to back. I'm gonna add some Orton Effect to really make the whole picture look a lot better overall. And I'm even gonna add an artificial sunburst to complexify the whole lighting scheme and add an additional point of interest, and even add some sharpness at the very end. So even though the video is relatively long, I really think that this video is going to be very beneficial to you whether you're new to Lightroom and Photoshop or more advanced, because I really go into detail with every single adjustment and slider and how I use them in combination with one another to get the effect that I want. And if you don't want to watch the whole video, you can also just go to the table of contents below and just go to the respective area of the editing that might interest you. But especially if you're new to Lightroom and Photoshop, I really would suggest you to watch the entire video, because overall it's still very concise and just a ton of information. Alright, so after this very long intro, I'm here in Lightroom with my picture and I actually shot this in a bunch of different ways with different focal points, exposures, and even some HDR sequences. But I'm actually not going to use an HDR sequence because I tried it in a bunch of different ways to just merge an HDR out of 5 single exposures. But at the end, unfortunately, no matter what I did, I always got these artifacts, and this is just because the leaves were just moving so much during the whole shoot, the whole process of the HDR pictures. And I mean, look at that, it's really a ton of artifacts and it would be almost impossible to get rid of in post, and even if it would really take a bunch of time to do so. So what I figured would be the best option was just to go with a single raw file right here. So this is not an HDR, this is literally just one exposure, and just edit this one, because at the end, even though we have a little bit more shadow detail in the HDR, just with the raw file itself, I really get enough shadow and highlight detail that I will ever need. And at the end, it's not that big of a difference compared to the HDR picture, and with just a single raw file, I don't have any artifacts. So even though I'm not going to merge any pictures into an HDR, I still have 3 different raw files right here with different focal points. And I tried to shoot this picture at f11, f16, but no matter what I did, I never managed to get everything from foreground to background perfectly in focus. So what I just did is stop down to f8, which is the sweet spot, so I don't have to worry about any diffraction, and shoot 3 different pictures, one with the foreground in focus, but instead the background is not really in focus. Then the second picture where it's just focused on the midground, so that one is very sharp, the midground, everything is fully in focus, and then the last picture just for the very distant background objects. So what I'm actually gonna do here is just take this middle picture with the midground in focus and edit on this one, and afterwards just synchronize the editing to all of the other pictures, and then go into Photoshop and merge them together to really get the most amount of sharpness and really just have the sharp areas of the respective picture in the final photo. So might seem a little bit confusing at first, but I will go way more in depth on that once I get to it. But anyways, let's get started with the actual editing here, and first off, I'm gonna raise the shadows a little bit just to get a little bit more shadow detail in these dark parts. Just looks a little bit more interesting, and I'm also gonna bring down the highlight slider by quite a bit so I also retrieve a lot of the highlight detail. Then I also want to make this picture a little bit more dynamic, so I'm just gonna bring up the whites right here, although I don't really want to bring it too far, just a little bit. And from before to after, it just seems a little bit more dynamic. Then with the blacks, I'm actually not sure here because I don't want to make this picture too dark, but I also don't want to make it too light. I think I might just raise the blacks a little bit, and that is so I can bring the contrast further to the right without actually clipping too many of the shadow details. and I might even have to go a little bit further. So here's before any of the contrast and the black adjustments, and here is after. It's just a little bit more punchy while still remaining all of that shadow detail. So once again, here's before the contrast and the black adjustments, and here is after. So I really like that look. In terms of the overall exposure, I don't really think there's any way that we have to go to. Maybe just a little bit into the plus exposure actually, by 1/4 of a stop. So really not too much, but it does help the overall picture a little bit. Then in terms of the color temperature, I'm actually not sure. I want to keep this relatively neutral at first, just so we have a nice starting point, but I also don't want to make it too cool. So what I think I'm gonna do is just go a little bit down to around 4900, 4800 Kelvin, and I really like that value and that overall look pretty good. Now tint, I don't really think that there's too much in terms of the tint, maybe just a little bit into the magenta, and that also looks pretty good. So if I show you from before any adjustments to after, it's a little bit more punchy, a little bit more details, especially in the shadows and in the highlights, but it's definitely nothing major as of yet. So then clarity is a very difficult thing because it really can make your picture look way too cluttered, way too textured if you add too much of it. So what I'm actually going to do here is just leave clarity at 0 and go to it later on once I have a more refined picture, and maybe even just add some local clarity instead of any global one. Then vibrant saturation, if you want to change anything here, I would definitely suggest you to change the vibrance, because vibrant adds color more subtle than the saturation tool. As you can see here, 50 in saturation really looks very unnatural, and 50 in vibrance looks a lot better. But once again, this is already a very vibrant picture, and right now I really don't think I have to change anything. Then let's go down to the tonal curve, and here we also have a highlight slider, but the highlight slider in the tonal curve is very different to the one in the basics adjustments. The one in the basics adjustments really just affects the whole bright-ish part of the picture in a very broad way, but the highlight slider in the tonal curve really just affects the very bright parts of your picture. So I'm actually gonna raise that a little bit just to get even more dynamic in the picture, even more differentiation. But you definitely don't want to go too far with it, otherwise you're just gonna blow your very bright spots. Then to the lights, I think I'm gonna go a little bit into the minus lights, and in fact the whole tonal curve adjustments will really just affect the very kind of detailed and fine areas of your global picture. So unlike, for example, the shadows in the basic adjustments, which really affects the whole picture in a very broad way, the shadows in the tonal curve will just affect the very dark parts in your picture. But anyways, let's go to darks first, and I really think I'm gonna bring down the darks and in exchange bring up the shadows a little bit. So because the shadows in the tonal curve really just affect the very dark parts of the shadows, it is a really nice combination to bring that one up while bringing down the darks or even the blacks or contrast, because then you will still remain this very dark and contrasty look, but at the same time still retrieve some of that shadow detail. So for example, from before any shadow adjustments here, I like the overall look, but it's just a little bit too dark, not enough shadow details in some areas. But by raising that one, it really recovers a lot of it while not ruining the overall looks. So let's just quickly see before any tonal curve adjustments, and here's after. It really adds a lot of differentiation between the tree stump and the actual leaves, and it also refines the picture a little bit. So once again, here's before any adjustments, just a raw file, and to the right is the editing that we've done so far. Then let's go on to the colors, and the next thing in line would be the HSL tool, but I really don't want to change this right now because it has a very minor effect in terms of the color of the picture. So what I'm actually going to do is go straight away down to the camera calibration and just play around with the profile. And what the profile will do is just change around the different colors, the different hues, and just kind of the overall look of your picture. So I would definitely suggest you just go through all of these different profiles and at the end stick with whatever you like best. It's really very different from picture to picture, but as you can see here, landscape is just way over the top in this particular photo. I actually really like camera neutral, then camera portrait is also kind of over the top, and camera standard actually looks really good. So let's just quickly see the difference between camera faithful and camera standard. I think at the end, camera faithful just works a little bit better. Camera standard just makes the highlights blow out a little bit too much. So what I'm actually going to do here is go with camera faithful. And if I show you the comparison from Adobe standard, which is where we started out with, to camera faithful, especially within the actual wooden part of the tree, it really has a pretty big difference, and I really love the look. So I'm just gonna stick there. Then also, besides the camera profile, we also have the primary color sliders, and what this will do is change the primary colors. So for example, if I would change the blue primary color, I will also affect all of the other colors. So it's kind of hard to explain what this exactly does, but it really just changes the colors, and I would suggest you to just play around with all of these sliders, because once again, it's very different from picture to picture. So I'm gonna start off with the tint here, the shadow tint, and I think maybe just a little bit into the plus, then the red primary color. Now I'm actually gonna take quite a bit of time here and really go with the look that I like the best at the end. And I don't like the look towards the right, maybe a little bit towards the left, but not too much. Works pretty well. Then the saturation, just a little bit into the plus saturation with the reds and the greens here. I actually really like the look when I bring the green towards the right. I like both looks a lot, but I think at the end a little bit into the plus works really well. And in terms of the saturation, maybe, actually let's just leave it at 0 for now. And lastly, the blues, just see what I want to do here. I'm actually gonna go a little bit into the minus blues, and in exchange go also, just a little bit into the plus saturation, just so we have even more differentiation. So here is before any camera calibration adjustments, here is after. Maybe after all I'm just gonna reset the shadow tint, but after all I think it's a really big difference, especially in terms of the wooden part of the tree stump itself. It really changes the color by quite a bit, and I really like it. So even if I'm zoomed in here, maybe you will be able to see it even better. From before to after, it really takes away that greenish tint on the tree, and in exchange also makes it look a lot more differentiating from the foreground to background. So I really like that look as of now. And then let's go down, or rather up into the HSL tool and go into the hue, grab this little pinpointer and go on the greens. And the HSL tool is kind of, it doesn't change the whole picture as much as the color sliders that we have below, but it still changes the picture by a little bit. So the greens, just gonna bring them up a little bit. And by the way, the reason why you want to grab this little pinpointer and go over a color is because a lot of colors have some yellows in them, for example, and not just green in the greens. So it can be a really difficult thing to figure out how much you want to change each of those sliders if you just move them separately. But just by grabbing this little pinpointer and moving it up or down, you really don't have to worry about that. So I'm just gonna go a little bit into the plus greens here, and also in terms of the hue of the foreground, maybe just a little bit more like this works pretty well. Then saturation, I don't really think, once again, there's too much saturation needed, but let's just try it out regardlessly. Maybe just a little bit in terms of the plus foreground, which is a mixture between yellow and orange. And with the greens, I really think the greens are already saturated enough, so I'm just gonna reset them. Then lastly, luminance would be also kind of how bright something is. I very rarely adjust this, but it's still worth to play around with. But here, definitely in terms of the foreground, orange and yellows, I don't really want to change anything here. But in terms of the greens, maybe actually, what if I go a little bit into the minus greens here? Just a little bit, I think that might actually work. So While I'm at it, let's actually go back to the hue and go to the blues and change the blue hue as well to kind of a little bit darker blue. So it's a very small part of this picture, but it does change it a little bit. So here's before the HSL tool adjustment, here's after. Maybe I just went a little bit into the plus hue with the orange, but something like that works pretty well. So here's before, here's after. I really like the look actually. Yeah, it definitely refines everything and it makes it seem a little bit more fluid and more natural. So I'm done with the HSL and the camera calibration tool, and these two are really where your major color adjustments will be. So you can see here with the camera calibration, if I just turn off both of them real quick, with the camera calibration, I just added it kind of general colors, kind of refined some tonalities, and then I went into the HSL tool and just refined them even more, especially the brown tones, but also the green tones just look a little bit different, and I really love the look. It is very important that you mix up the different sliders and the different tools to at the end get the best possible look that you can get. So then the only other color adjustment that you really have in Lightroom is split toning, and split toning is actually not really something I use to adjust the tones. It's really just something I use when I want to add certain kind of color in the highlights. For example, here we have the highlight slider first. You can just go to this little box and then add any sort of color within the highlights, and usually you want to stick within the orange and yellow tones. If you have a very colorful sunset picture, for example, then you can also go kind of into the magenta and maybe even blue tones and stuff like that. But for this particular picture, I'm actually thinking of kind of adding a little bit of warmth. So of course this is way too much saturation, but in terms of the actual amount, I think a little bit would actually work here. So just really a little bit. So here's before split toning, here's after. It just makes the highlights seem a little bit warmer. And shadows is really, I don't use shadows very much, but it does kind of the same thing, just with the shadow areas. So you can also play around with that one. And then also down here you would have shadows, and shadows is really a thing that I don't use very much at all. It does kind of the same thing as highlights, just with the shadow areas, and of course you don't want to add any warm tones in the shadows, because naturally they are coming from the highlights. You will just make your picture look terrible. But sometimes adding a little bit of blue can help, but in this particular case, I really think there is no adjustment that really works. Yeah, I think everything is a bit too much, so I'm just gonna leave that at 0 and go on to the next adjustment, which is actually detail. And I'm not gonna add any sharpening and any noise reduction right now, because I first of all want to blend the pictures together and then add a little bit of sharpening in Photoshop, and then afterwards, maybe as a final touch, add some sharpening and some noise reduction in the detail tool. But in terms of the color noise reduction slider, I really love this slider. So what this will do is get rid of the purple and green sensor noise in your picture, and it's a thing that many people won't even notice and won't even be aware of, that there is such a thing, until you see the difference from before to after. So as I bring the color slider to the right, you will see, especially if you're watching this in full HD, everything will look so much cleaner and so much less noisy. So once again, here's the default. Look at these close areas, these very shadow areas especially, to after. It really looks so much cleaner and so much more smooth. So at the end, I really love this color noise reduction slider. I would absolutely suggest you to bring that up to around 80 to even 100 in every single picture, especially if you have very dark shadows. But as you can see, it only has good effects as well. Even if I change it around, it doesn't change the color of the picture whatsoever. It really just makes your picture look a lot cleaner. And while doing so, it also doesn't take away any of the sharpness or any of the clarity as, for example, noise reduction would do. So I absolutely love the color noise reduction slider, absolutely take advantage of it and just bring it to the right in every single picture. So then let's just zoom out again and go to the lens corrections, and I'm just gonna enable profile corrections here, choose my lens. This was, by the way, shot in a Canon 18-55 kit lens, and it's really a great thing to just enable that. It will get rid of the distortion and does a great job. And then second of all, go to color and just press on remove chromatic aberration. And what this will do is get rid of the purple and green fringing on the high contrast edges, such as leaves and all that kind of stuff. So if I show you before that little check mark, you see here, especially on the branches, you have this kind of line of purple, and afterwards it's just gone. So it's really a great tool. Maybe there's even a part where I can demonstrate it even better. Yeah, look here, you really have the entire place full with green fringing, and afterwards it just looks a lot better. So just click this little checkpoint. Once again, it's kind of like color noise reduction. Just click it, very easy, very simple, and it really works in every single case. Then, once we're done with that, lastly, actually, in terms of global adjustments, we have effects. And in effects, you can add some vignetting. And I actually really like vignetting. It helps to get more attention towards the center and also set a kind of a little bit more darkish mood. But I don't want to add any right now because I still have to stitch all of these three pictures together in Photoshop. So I'd rather do that later. So what I'm gonna do right now is just go to my three pictures. So remember, these are the three same pictures, same settings, same everything, just shot seconds apart. The only difference is the focal point. So with this one, we have the foreground sharp. With this one that we've edited, we have the midground sharp. And with the last one, we have the background in focus and sharp. So at the end, usually it doesn't matter which of these three pictures you edit initially, because you can just grab them at the end and click on synchronize, then just check all and synchronize, and then you will have all of the adjustment that you've done on your first picture copied over to the other pictures. So you just want to do that before you export the photos, of course, because otherwise you will have a very, very different kind of look. Alright, so now I have all of these three different pictures synced with the exact same settings, the exact same editing, and actually, the thing is, it does change a little bit. Overall, it looks pretty similar, but because I shot these with a few seconds apart, the light must have changed a little bit during that time, and especially in the last picture, it kind of looks a bit pinkish over here. So what I'm actually going to do real quick is just go to the pictures and make sure they look as close together as possible. So this is where we had the reference point. This is the picture I like the most. And then here, honestly, these really look close enough together, maybe just a little bit into the plus shadows. And they look very, very similar. But the last picture here is kind of really dark. So what I'm going to do here is raise the shadows even more. Maybe even raise the whites, and also grab an adjustment brush to fix this weird pink glow that weirdly goes sort of away once I zoom in. So what I'm gonna do is just grab an adjustment brush, make it a little bit bluer, also go into the fringe to make sure I don't have any fringing on the actual picture, the area right here. And then also go to the other areas where I saw it and just brush over there as well. It's really weird that it goes away once I zoom in, but it's still not quite as good. So afterwards, I think that should look a lot better. Now, in terms of the overall exposure, I think it's very similar and it's close enough, maybe just a little bit more into the plus whites. But anyways, close enough, so here I have all of these three pictures very close together in terms of the overall look. So sometimes, even if you sync your pictures to the exact same editing, even if you shot it a few seconds apart, it can really change because the lighting changed, but it's definitely no big deal here. So what I'm gonna do now is just select all of these three pictures and right click, edit in Photoshop, not edit in Photoshop, actually I want to open them as separate layers, and that will open Photoshop and open them as three separate layers as the name suggests. But anyways, I'm gonna let Photoshop load everything and I'm gonna jump right back once it's done. Alright, Photoshop is done loading these three different layers, so now we have all of these three pictures in Photoshop. And you can see They're all very similar in terms of the editing, once again, because they were just shot seconds apart. It's a little bit of a difference, but really nothing major. And the leaves are also kind of moving apart, you know, are on different places from the different pictures because of the wind, but it's definitely no big deal as well. So because I shot these at 3 different focal points, which means on this picture I focused on the foreground, with this one on the midground, and with the other one on the background, I actually have a little bit of focus breathing. And what focus breathing is that it changes your whole picture, your whole composition, or rather, yeah, your whole composition, your whole framing, just a little bit with most lenses. So as you can see, it's such a small thing, but we want to make sure that we fix that before we actually stack all of the pictures together, because that would otherwise kind of create a little bit of blur, which is not what I want. So what I'm gonna do here is just go to select all of the 3 layers. You can just click the first layer, go to the last layer, hold down Shift and left click again, and you will have all of the layers selected. So now what I'm gonna do is go to Edit, Edit, Auto Align Layers, and just click on Auto. It is very important that you do not click on any of these 2 things. I really found them to mess up everything. So just click on Auto and nothing else. Then click on OK, and it will align all of these pictures. So all of the focus breathing is just cropped out. And as you can see, beforehand we had a little bit of difference once we zoomed out in so much. But now if I just change it, it's the exact same, just of course not as sharp, but we don't have any focus breathing effect. So it's very important that you do that once again to get the sharpest picture at the end. After Photoshop aligned all of your pictures, you might get a little bit of an edge here on the sides, and that is just because it had to crop out a certain area that was affected by focus breathing. So you just want to make sure that you go through all of your layers and at the end go with the one that has the most of it. Then make sure you have everything selected, grab the cropping tool and just crop the picture. So very easy, but I'm gonna skip forward a little bit to after the cropping, so see you in a second. Alright, so now I'm back after cropping everything out and I've got all of my layers perfectly aligned without any alpha channel on the sides. So what I'm gonna do now is make sure, first of all, that I have everything selected, very important. Then go to Edit, go to Auto Blend Layers, make sure you stack images, just make sure you have seamless tones and colors on, and uncheck Content Aware Fill. Then click on OK, and it will stack your pictures, and this is where the actual focus stacking takes place. So now it will just automatically figure out which areas are in focus, which aren't, and it will just create a mask and pretty much just use the respective area of the picture that are in focus. So if I show you here the mask, you see it's really, you cannot really do this by yourself, you really have to let Photoshop do this. And now we have the entire picture in focus. So let's just check real quick. From the foreground, really good in focus, and to the background, also very good. So you see, focus stacking can really be a great thing, and especially if you have a very immediate foreground element, it is sometimes impossible to get everything in focus, and focus stacking is a very easy and a very good way to do that. For some reason, Photoshop decided to crop the picture or align the picture a bit more, so we got another edge, just a very small one, so I'm just gonna crop that away as well. So just something like that, press enter, and that should do the job. So now we have our pretty much final picture in terms of the sharpening, in terms of the cropping, maybe actually even another one. This is really difficult to do in Photoshop. I like Lightroom a bit better with cropping. Well, it's not difficult, but just not as convenient. But anyways, now we have our picture perfectly cropped, perfectly sharp from front to back. So once again, if I just show you here, for example, the first picture, it just took some areas, especially in the foreground, to use them because they were in focus. Then this one is the middle layer, so pretty much the most part of the picture. And then the last one just for the very distant part. So it's really great thing. Once again, everything from foreground to background is perfectly in focus. Now what I'm gonna do is just merge down these layers into one. Yes, apply. I don't really want to change anything on the mask anymore. Then apply once again. and we have our picture. So now what I'm actually gonna do is just zoom in, and I think the picture overall could use a little bit of sharpening. So what I'm gonna do here is go to Filter, Sharpen, and just click on Sharpen. And I really like to add one of those. If you would have a long exposure with a lot of water, that might not be the best option to do. But right here, I really think it adds a lot of sharpening in a good way, and at the same time, it doesn't over sharpen anything. So the Photoshop Sharpen filter, I think, is a very good thing to do just as a kind of general sharpness. So you could add even more if I would, for example, export that for Flickr or 500px or Facebook. I would add even more sharpening because it would be viewed less big. But just because I might want to print this picture, I don't want to over sharpen it as of yet, because of course I can always add more sharpening in the future. So now what I'm gonna do is add the Orton effect, and the Orton effect is just adding blur in certain parts of the picture, and that really adds, it makes the picture more dreamy, more mysterious, but it also takes away attention on certain parts of the picture. So for example, in this photo, this is actually before any Orton blur, and here is after, and this is just, you know, you see the difference. It's quite a bit more mysterious, more dreamy once again, and it really takes away a lot of the attention on these leaves. So now what I'm gonna do is add the Orton effect to this picture. So for that, just go to my layer right here, click on Ctrl J. If you're on a Mac, I think it's Command J, and we have a copy of this layer. Then I'm gonna go to Image and Apply Image. Just make sure you're on screen, very important, and just click on OK. So it's very bright, but that's entirely okay, because now I'm just gonna Ctrl J again this layer right here and go from the blending mode into multiply. Then after I've done that, I'm gonna go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm gonna add a nice radius that really looks very kind of pleasing. It doesn't really have to be the one, you know, you can always bring down the opacity, so really go for the structure and overall look that you like better. I'm just gonna play around with it right here and go for whatever I like best at the end. I kinda like this one, so let's just click on OK. So now I have a really very heavy Orton effect, but what I'm gonna do is just merge down the layer into the other one, and you can rename that, for example, Orton Effect. Alright, here we go. And then you can go into the opacity and really bring that down so it isn't as overdone. So in this particular picture, actually let me zoom in here so I have a better overview. I think actually just around 30 works pretty well, but because I don't want the Orton effect on every single part of the picture, I'm actually not gonna add a layer mask here. And if I just show you before any Orton effect to after, it really works for certain parts of the picture, but it doesn't for others. So now I'm just having a layer here, and I'm gonna grab a brush, make sure it's decently sized and 0 hardness, so everything is very smooth. And opacity, I'm actually gonna go to around 50% at first, because I don't want to brush out everything very harshly, I want to do it gradually. So then just make sure you have black as your foreground color selected, and you can brush out the areas of your picture that you don't want the Orton effect on. So let's just zoom in here once again. Go back to the brush, and for example, in these leaves, I'm not really sure if it works that well, so I'm just gonna brush that out. Same with that. And it's really up to you where you like the Orton effect to be. So it's very different from picture to picture, of course, but also very different from area to area. I really like to have, for example, this tree stump, this wood, just some areas of it a little bit with the Orton effect and some areas without it. So just gonna do it right here, brush out quite a lot of the foreground, also some of that, and just have it very gently removed. So something like that works pretty well. So let's just quickly see. Let's just see from before and after. So here's before the Orton effect, here's after. It really looks a lot better, but I kind of want to get this rid of this very dark black tones. Same with here, and the branches as well. Maybe a bit more on here, just make sure the Orton effect doesn't apply here. and I think that actually works pretty well. So let's just quickly see. Yeah, I don't really think there's any other areas that really bother me. So let's just bring the opacity a little bit up to see whether I can fine-tune that a bit more. But at the end, to be honest, I think around 30 opacity works pretty well. And maybe even get rid of some of that Orton effect right here. And just some areas right there. So yeah, opacity is fine, but let me just fine-tune some of these areas even more, just so we don't have these very dark areas selected by the Orton effect. But at the end, I do like how it looks right here. I think it definitely adds to the picture. So here's before any Orton effect, here is after. It definitely makes it a little bit more dreamy, a bit more simplistic as well. So especially here in the branches in the background, it's not quite as aggressive, I guess. So I really like that tool, and I absolutely love how it looks. Now that I have the Orton effect, I have stacked the picture, I've aligned everything, I've sharpened it a little bit. I really think there's not too much to do else than that in Photoshop. So what I'm gonna do is just save the picture, so it will re-import into Lightroom. And as you can see, we're back into Lightroom, and from before, this is the pictures. These are the 3 pictures that I've merged together. Of course, now we have all of the things in focus, so that's really great. We have the Orton effect, and I think it really works together. So I know this is a very long tutorial, but I really like the way it turned out. But I'm still not done yet. I was actually thinking of going into Photoshop and actually making kind of an artificial sun here. Now the thing is, I'm not really sure if I really want that in my picture, but really quick, if you would want to have that, just create a new layer, an empty one, then grab a gradient, make sure your top color is white, then just add a gradient over the entire picture. Then I'm gonna go into filter, distort, wave, and it's very important that you find something that really works together. So something between like 16 to maybe around 80 works pretty well. And amplitude, go all the way to around 75. The number of generations, I think around 16 should work pretty well. So let's just quickly see how that looks. And yeah, that should work pretty well. So then go to filter, distort, then this time go to polar coordinates and just click on OK. So then we can change our blending mode from normal into screen, and we got kind of an effect like that. So then I'm just gonna click on Ctrl T to actually crop the picture and resize the effect right here. And I'm just gonna do it something like this for now. So let's just see it like that. And then of course move it in an area that would work. For example here, I do think it works. You could of course also add some additional colors. For example here in the hue saturation, you would probably want to go into colorize, add a little bit of yellow right here with the maximum saturation, just something like that. And then go down in the saturation again once you have the actual color, and then just want to click down the Alt key and just bring that down so it only affects that layer right there. So that is a very easy thing to do. You could of course also kind of move it around once again to really have it at the right spot. But I'm not really sure if it works all that well at the end. It definitely makes it a little bit more interesting, but at the end it also takes away a bit of attention from the rest of the picture, and it doesn't look as good as if you would have, for example, a lens flare in camera. So what I'm gonna do is actually just leave you with the option and with the, showing you that you can do something like that. I might make an in-depth tutorial about that in the future, but I think I'm just gonna leave it without the sunspot. So if you want to do that, you can, and I might even fine-tune it a little bit more and get a really nice look of it, and then upload a final picture of that very photo to 500px, etc. But at the end, I think it's not necessary, so I'm just gonna stop without this lens flare and going back into Lightroom with the previously imported picture, which is right here. So here is the TIFF, afterwards, of course, everything sharp from front to back, and also after the Orton effect, which really, especially here in the leaves, makes everything seem a little bit smoother and more mysterious. So now what I'm actually going to do is go to a final touch. So I'm going to go over all of the adjustments once again. Well, not all of them, but just real quick, see if there's anything else needed. I think, for example, I'm going to bring up the whites a little bit. Maybe bring down, actually, let's leave the highlights where they were. Let's just play around with contrast again, and that's really a thing that you want to do once you've merged together pictures and edited in Photoshop. Just do your last adjustments, especially afterwards in terms of the local adjustments, but I'm going to do it relatively quick here. So I think clarity, maybe just a little bit of plus clarity in the global adjustments. Then here, I don't think there's too much needed, maybe just a little bit into the plus highlights. And once again, I'm going to do this relatively quick. Also, with noise reduction, I really don't think there's too much noise in here, and also sharpening, I'm, not going to do anything there because it's very different whether you sharpen for print or for online sharing, etc. So I don't want to make this edit even longer than it already is. So then, a thing that I do want to do is go to effects and just add some vignetting, because once again, before I went into Photoshop, I told you that I like the vignetting look, but I didn't really want to add it because I still had to blend the pictures. Well, now I'm just going to add a little bit of vignetting here, bring the midpoint towards the center, make a very soft edge, and I do think that actually works quite well. So in terms of the local adjustments, so if I show you real quick, this is just a picture after Photoshop, and this is after the little refinement, so definitely no big deal, but I do like it a bit better. Maybe even I'm gonna bring up the shadows here in the tonal curve. So then let's go to the local adjustments, and I promise this is gonna be the last part of this very, very, very long tutorial. I mean, I don't even know if anybody's watching. If you are, thank you very much for that. So let's go here into the local adjustments and add some dodge and burning. And dodge and burning is just making individual parts darker and brighter. And I really love that to complexify the whole picture. So I'm gonna grab a radial filter right here, and first of all, just go a bit into the plus exposure, plus whites, maybe a little bit of contrast, and then just add some filters like that over the picture. Now you can of course fine-tune everything and actually maybe even a little bit of clarity, but then I'm just gonna right-click duplicate, add it to another part of the picture, and it's really, dodge and burning is such an important thing. It can really make your picture look so much more interesting, so much more dynamic, and it's really a nice finishing touch. If you would like to learn more about dodge and burning, I've made a complete tutorial about it, so you get a lot more information there than right here. So let's just see another one, maybe just right there, and another filter, a pretty big one actually, without the clarity here in the sky, or rather in the leaves, with not that much effect. So that's what the thing that I love about the radial filters, you can just move them around and change the values without having any other impact on the other filters. So I'm just gonna finish up right here. So in terms of the plus exposure radial filters, I think I'm done. So here's before, here's after, just a little bit more interesting. Maybe I'm gonna shift them a little bit more towards the left. And now I'm just gonna add some real quick minus exposure radial filters as well, just on some parts to make everything even a bit more complex, make some more dark and bright parts. So this is really a thing that you would want to spend a lot more time on, but I'm just showing you, the general look. But of course you could zoom in, really go in depth with everything. But I think overall it really works how it is. So as a very last thing, let's actually see another radial filter over here. And as a very last thing to this picture, actually before that, I'm gonna add another plus exposure filter just right there. And right now I'm gonna grab an adjustment brush right here and go a little bit into the minus exposure, really make it very big, make sure the feather is to 100, and just add some vignetting on the bottom right here. And honestly, I think this is pretty much 99% of the picture done. Maybe I'm actually gonna grab another radial filter real quick with some plus exposure, just like that, and bring it in between those leaves, just so like this. And from before that one to after, it's just a little bit more interesting. But anyways, I think the picture at the end, I really like how it turned out, and I think I'm really done here. So let's just quickly see. This is before editing any further, so just importing it out of Photoshop after all of the edits. And it's not too bad, you know, it's really good. It's just a few final touches that were made in Lightroom. And keep in mind, you could definitely refine all of that dodge and burning even more and really make it seem even more natural. So this is really just a very quick edit. But anyways, so here is in Photoshop, after exporting it into Photoshop. Here is the picture before exporting it into Photoshop. And then we have the import right here, and this is really the raw file without any adjustments to it. So from start to finish, it's really quite a big of a difference, especially if you look at all of the small parts, the small, details, especially if you zoom in here, if you compare it side by side, it's really a huge difference. Let's just wait until Lightroom loads. And once again, this is a very long tutorial. I just wanted to show you my whole workflow and really show you how I would edit a picture, how I would do it myself. Usually I just kind of make the short version, but here it's really everything just how I would edit myself. And as you can see, especially because of the focus stacking, we have this background as well as the foreground perfectly in focus, and I think that's really a very big part of a picture. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching this very long tutorial. If you would like to see more videos just like this one, Photoshop videos and other photography videos, then be sure to subscribe. Also, if you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you did not like it because you thought it was way too long, not well explained or anything, please give me a thumbs down. That really helps me out a lot to see which kind of videos I should make in the future. And of course, if you really liked it and you think your friends could find it helpful, of course sharing it with them would also be hugely appreciated. So I took away enough time of you already, so I'm gonna make it really short. Just a real quick question: if you would like to see me do different videos, for example, do kind of like more short 10-minute tutorials on a certain effect, for example the Orton Effect or image stacking or anything like that, then please let me know in the comments down below. I know that probably most people don't have the time to watch all of these videos over and over again, and they're also really time consuming for me to make with all of the editing and posts and stuff. But I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, leave me a comment down below with the kind of videos you would like to see me in the future and the sort of things that you would like to see me explain in the future, whether it is in Lightroom or Photoshop. But thank you very much for watching and have a great day.